African Christian Democratic Party is marching against COVID-19 vaccination. The party believes that vaccines will soon be mandatory. The march is part of the ACDP's election campaign. For more on this, let's cross to our colleague following the story, Yolisa Njamela. A very good morning to you, Yolisa. What are you seeing on the ground?
Good morning, Desiree. We are downtown here at Beyers Square. A number of ACDP supporters and leaders have gathered here. They're saying they're marching against what they call mandatory vaccines. Now, we know, as a matter of fact, that there is no mandatory vaccination here in South Africa. In fact, about a week ago, the IFP put it, an IFP leader put it to Dr. Patla, the health minister, and asked them if, in the face of hesitation against vaccination, does he believe that it is time that government ensures that vaccination is mandatory by law? And he said government has no plans to do that in any form or way and at any point. But we are joined by Bongani Luthuli, who's a national whip of the ACDP, to tell us more about this. First, let's ask Bongani, why are you here? If you can explain it to our viewers more clearer.
Thank you for having me. The ACDP is here to demonstrate against mandatory vaccination. Let me clarify our position very well. You recall that during the manifesto, the president of the party, Reverend Meshwe, clearly stated that the ACDP is not against vaccination as a whole. We are against mandatory vaccination. Now, in your opening remarks, you say that there is no policy on mandatory vaccination. I beg to differ. Practically, what we are seeing is a steamrolling. It's a rolling out, a blanket rollout of vaccination en masse. You look at the situation in Wits, for instance. At Wits University, what is happening is on the 8th of October, they sent out a communique that from the 11th of October, everybody must be vaccinated and in order to access university and the university community. Now, if you say, because they're not saying everybody must, well, you must try and get a vaccination certificate, a PCR test, so that you are immune from carrying a COVID certificate vaccination test, then we say, no. That is coercion. That is actually mandatory, because that test costs about 850. How do you expect a student every week to bring such a test? You might as well make that mandatory. We see companies like Discovery saying as of January there'll be mandatory vaccination. How can we say that there's no mandatory vaccination when we know that the framework that came from the Minister of Labour was that if you refuse after consultations, it may lead to a dismissal. So this is all just cosmetics. In our view, it is mandatory.
Well, it would seem to me that you perhaps may be misleading your supporters, because you are saying to me now it is coercion, it is not policy. So in effect, you and I agree on this, that there is no policy that government has that mandates this, while companies will ensure that they have rights. In any company they would say that they have a right not to allow you in. So it's coercion, not policy. So are you confusing, or are you just electioneering?
We are very clear. Even before the elections, the SABC has stood as the only political party that was vocal against mandatory vaccination. We're quite lucid in our view. Look at the game that recently took place at FNB. The people that were vaccinated were allowed. You want to tell me that such an exclusion is welcome and such exclusion is okay because it doesn't say mandatory vaccination? You're going to move with the certificates all the way to restaurants and traveling. You want to tell the people of South Africa that no, it's not mandatory. If they can't move around, the freedom of movement is infringed. If they can't go to universities, their freedom of education is infringed. If they can't have a voice to say, look, we believe in our religion, Section 15 of the Constitution, so we not take the vaccines, and they face occupational detriment in the workplaces, they face a backlash from the communities. It's window dressing. The vaccinations are mandatory. And I think let's leave out the rhetoric, Yonela, and look at this situation as it is. We are already, we dare say, we are already at an epoch where this government is literally going against the gains made in the democratic dispensation that we are in the most celebrated constitution, one of the most celebrated constitution and progressive constitution that speak of liberties such as sacrosanct rights in the Bill of Rights being undermined in the name of a pandemic. We're not denying, on the record that there's a pandemic. We're saying look at less restrictive means. In fact, that's what you envisage by Section 36 of the Constitution. There's no law of general application. So what gives the employers the right to say vaccination or not? We are inundated, Yonela, with referrals, and I'm the ACDP lawyer as well, of people coming to the workplace saying it's either vaccination or the highway. So the question is, practically, is it not mandatory?
So, Bongani, while I have a right to say no to vaccination, companies have a right of admission as well. What do you say to that?
No, companies don't have a right to admission. What you're having is you are pitting two rights against one another. You've got the employee's right to freedom of trade. You've got the employer's right to admit you. Which one is a constitutional imperative? Add into the mix some of those fundamental rights such as equality, Section 9, add into the mix Section 12, the right to dignity. Which one trumps which one? We know very well, and I mean, if you look at Huxton versus Lane, the Concord decision was clear on how do you limit a right. We are not saying that these rights will never be limited. We're saying they should be limited in terms of the law of general application. There is no law, first and foremost. And secondly, there is no test case yet that allows the government, and if the ACDP is not on the forefront of that litigation, it certainly be one of the parties that will join such a litigation. So we are here to sound a death knell to those who would blatantly disregard the rights of the people, and we're saying we are watching you. We are here visible. It's not just electioneering. We are saying come at the hour, come at the moment where ACDP stands vocally. We are swimming against the tide. You would know. We are swimming against the current vocal and leading discourse, whether it's medicine, which is not conclusive. There's no medical consensus that vaccinations are in fact effective. What we do know is that the government is tone deaf and SAPRA to other alternatives. That's why we're here. We're sending the memorandum to the Department of Justice, and quite timely so. On Monday, we know that the Chief Justice resigned. We are saying to the judiciary that when lawfare happens, when these issues that are brought to court to be settled, let not justice and righteous ruling retire with the Chief Justice. Let it prevail, and let the legacy of Chief Justice Mogoeng, even when these cases come out, actually be the one that prevails, and that we take this country forward. So that's why we're here.
So I put it to you just as a last issue, Bongani, that these are mere semantics. You know, like we've been discussing for the past few minutes, that this is not government policy. Who then will you be taking on in terms of taking to court?
I would respond and say I deny that this is mere cosmetics. You know, the ACDP is one party that is on the ground. You would see how the president has kowtowed on these issues. Firstly, you know that the president came out and said on national TV, no one shall be forced to take a vaccine. However, he comes out more recently in the last address to say, well, we're moving towards implementing a vaccine certificate. You remind us of those painful times of apartheid where you say, well, we're not saying don't move, but we're saying if you want to move, you need to make sure that you've got the right passport for you to move in the city, or you are stationed in the township. It's akin to that. We've made significant gains as a country. We are not saying that we are downplaying the pandemic, but we are saying, are there not less restrictive means you can deal with this? Are there no means where government can say, well, we are willing to look at whether conventional or unconventional? What is the government saying about boosters? That's part of the manifesto of the ACDP. We know that Father said, look, the vaccines themselves are not going to be effective come 9 months down the line. You have to boost them. So why are we driving the narrative that they are the end-all and be-all? So I stand again on behalf of the ACDP to say, without fear, favor, prejudice, or shame, to say ours is a just cause. We will be vindicated, because although we say cosmetically it looks like it's not mandatory, in practice it is. Watch my words, and you will see the ACDP being vindicated in this regard.
When Reverend Meshwe was speaking during the manifesto launch about a week ago, he said Jesus Christ allowed us to crisscross the world. Jesus Christ did not say we shouldn't go to a certain country or another country, referring to the issue of vaccinations. What do you say then to people who put it to you that you are merely just being Christian fundamentalists?
Well, let's look at the ACDP in its proper context. One, we know the ACDP is the one part that stands for godly government. It's a one part that espouses values. So we are unashamed about our stance around what we stand for. It will be contradictory for us if we allow such limitations, because at the core of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Great Commission, Book of Matthew, is that go ye and preach to the ends of the world. That's why the ACDP exists. The ACDP stands not just for Christian fundamentals, as you so label us. It stands for all those that espouses principles of a godly government, not just Christian, godly. It's a framework, it's a standard. You and I are sitting here, we have the State Capture Commission, we have a report that SIU reports around what happened with the vaccine during the pandemic. We're in a pandemic, which is a corruption. You need the ACDP as a moral conscience, and policies such as this, or stance and issues and posturing such as this by our government, vindicates the existence of the ACDP, and no other party will stand unwavering in its values like the ACDP. Name one of our leaders who's been accused of corruption. Name one of our MPs or MMCs who's been accused of corruption. So we practice what we preach, and therefore won't repent on our stance.
There you have it. Bongani Luthuli, he says they will not repent on this stance, and they call it mandatory vaccination, even though government doesn't have that policy, even though government continues to say that it is not law, it will not be law. When they move from here, they'll be going straight to the Constitutional Court. That is where they'll be handing over their memorandum. They're saying they're handing it over to the Department of Justice representative. Kenneth Meshwe, the Reverend, will be speaking to us at the Constitutional Court, but also he will be addressing his followers when he gets there. We put it to Wongani that this is merely electioneering, but he denies that absolutely. Back to you, Des, in the studio.
Yolisa Njamela is with the ACDP this morning, but the conversation of mandatory COVID-19 vaccines has been very topical this week. What with that Bafana match where only vaccinated fans were allowed through, and the Free State, the University of the Free State, also announcing intentions to make it mandatory for people who want to access their campuses next year to be vaccinated. Also, the South African Rugby yesterday advising its member unions that fully vaccinated supporters will be allowed to return to club and professional rugby matches within the limits announced by the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, while observing prevailing health guidelines. A maximum of 2,000 spectators will be permitted entry to rugby venues. All of these conversations, we also ran a poll yesterday. It's about to expire, I think, but there you have it. Oh, it has expired. These are the final results.